"You're fired." John didn't lower his voice. He raised it, loud enough that everyone in the hall could hear, loud enough that the people outside the conference room stopped talking, loud enough that the client sitting across from us froze mid-sentence. He wanted witnesses. We were supposed to be reviewing a proposal, slides on the screen, notebooks open, coffee going cold. Instead, John stood up, straightened his jacket, and said it again. "You're fired, effective immediately." No warning, no discussion, no private conversation, just my name being erased in front of people who didn't even work for us. I stayed seated, not because I was calm, because my body hadn't caught up yet. The client blinked and looked at me, then at John, then back at me again. Someone shifted in their chair. Someone cleared their throat. John kept talking. "We've decided to move forward without her. She's no longer part of this company." He said it like he was announcing a schedule change. Then he added something worse. "She's been costing us more than she's worth." That one landed. I felt my face get hot. Not angry, exposed. John looked around the room while he spoke, not at me. He wanted everyone to hear it. He wanted everyone to understand that this was a lesson. He said, "Security will deactivate her access. Payroll has been notified." That's when it hit me. This wasn't emotional. This wasn't reactive. This had already been done. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend myself. I didn't ask why. I stood up slowly. The chair scraped against the floor, louder than I meant it to be. Every sound felt amplified now. John glanced at me for half a second. No guilt, just control. I picked up my notebook and walked out. No one stopped me. In the hallway, the noise came back all at once. Phones ringing, footsteps, laughter from somewhere down the hall. My badge still worked on the elevator. That mattered more than it should have. When the doors opened on my floor, I went straight to my desk. My computer was locked. I typed my password. Access denied. Then my phone vibrated. A message from John. "Clear your desk. Your system access has been shut down. Return your badge at reception." No greeting, no explanation. I stared at the screen. In one meeting, he had taken my job, my income, my authority, my voice, and he made sure everyone saw it happen. That was the moment I understood something important. John didn't just fire me. He wanted to break me, and he believed I had nothing left once he did. I didn't go back into the meeting. I didn't look behind me. I stood at my desk for a long moment, hands resting on the edge, trying to remember what I had been doing before my name became a problem. An email draft was still open, half-written, something about timelines and approvals. I closed it. My name is Elena. I was 32 at the time, and everything I had just lost was tied to one reason: my daughter, Bella. She was 6, old enough to ask questions, young enough to believe the answers. She thought I worked in a big building with glass walls. She thought I made important decisions. She thought I was safe. This job wasn't just work, it was rent, school fees, groceries, doctor visits. It was the reason Bella never noticed how careful I was with money. I had taken this role because it was stable. Corporate office, clear structure, clear systems, clear rules. Or so I thought. I had been there long enough to understand how things really worked. Not the titles, not the org chart, the systems. Who approved what? Who actually made decisions? What broke when one person didn't show up? What stalled when one password stopped working? That was my job. I wasn't loud. I wasn't visible. I wasn't the one presenting in meetings. I was the one making sure everything behind the scenes worked before anyone stood up to talk. Processes, access controls, internal tools, workflow approvals, reporting pipelines, things people called boring until they stopped working. I built them slowly, carefully, quietly. I learned which systems couldn't be touched without breaking others, which approvals needed human judgment, which shortcuts would collapse later. John never cared about that. To him, systems were just boxes on a diagram, replaceable, simplifiable, cheap. He liked saying anyone could do my job. He liked saying the company was bigger than any one person. What he never did was learn how the company actually ran, and I never corrected him, because my work spoke quietly, and my daughter needed consistency more than credit. I packed my bag, a photo of Bella with missing teeth, a cardigan I kept for cold offices, my notebook with things I never wrote down digitally. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. I sent one message to the person watching Bella that day. I'm coming home early. Everything's okay. That was a lie, but it was the kind of lie parents learn to tell. As I walked out of the building, badge returned, access gone, name already fading, I understood something very clearly. They thought they had removed me. They didn't yet realize they had removed the person holding everything together. I had learned early that visibility was dangerous. If people saw you too clearly, they tried to simplify you. So I worked quietly. I was hired to support internal operations. That was the title, support. But what I actually did was make sure nothing collapsed. Every department had tools they depended on, shared dashboards, approval chains, internal platforms that tracked decisions nobody remembered making. Most people only saw the surface, buttons, reports, numbers updating. I saw what connected them. I knew which system fed another, which access level unlocked three others, which process looked automated but actually needed judgment. When something failed, people said the system was down. When it worked, they said the company was efficient. That difference was my work. I never built anything flashy, no big launches, no public praise. I fixed problems before they reached meetings. I patched gaps before clients noticed. I stayed late so others could leave on time. John never asked how things worked. He asked how fast they were. He liked clean charts, simple explanations, words like scalable and streamlined. In meetings, he would gesture at screens and say, "This runs itself now." People nodded because it sounded good. What he never saw was the quiet work underneath, the manual checks, the human decisions, the adjustments that couldn't be automated without damage. I didn't correct him because every time I tried to explain, his eyes glazed. He didn't want understanding. He wanted control, and control meant believing the system didn't need me. There were moments I thought about speaking up, about documenting everything, about protecting myself. But then Bella would fall asleep on my chest, and I would remind myself why I stayed. Stability mattered more than recognition. Consistency mattered more than ego. So I kept going. I trained people without telling them how much they didn't know. I fixed errors without pointing fingers. I absorbed blame quietly. I made myself easy to overlook, and that was the mistake. Because when you make complex things look simple, people start believing they are. By the time John stood in that room and fired me, he truly believed nothing would change. He thought the system would keep running, because from his view, it always had. What he didn't understand was that the system didn't run on software. It ran on decisions, memory, experience, judgment, and all of that had just walked out the door. The cost didn't show up all at once. It came quietly, in small decisions I told myself didn't matter. Late evenings became normal, not because I was asked, but because I knew what would break if I left on time. I learned how to answer emails while helping Bella with homework, how to mute calls while cooking dinner, how to smile on video meetings after nights with very little sleep. Bella started noticing things before I did. She would ask why my phone was always nearby, why I was tired even on weekends, why I looked distracted when she was talking. I told her work was busy, that things would slow down soon. I had been saying that for years. There were school events I missed, not because I didn't care, but because something at work always felt urgent. A system update, a client deadline, a request marked high priority. Each time I chose work, I told myself it was temporary, that stability required sacrifice. What I didn't realize was that the sacrifice was becoming permanent. John liked that I never pushed back. He liked that I handled problems without escalating. He liked that things stayed quiet. Silence made him comfortable. He started adding responsibilities without adding support. Small things at first, then entire processes. If something went wrong, he asked why it wasn't prevented, not how to fix it. I absorbed that too. At home, Bella started sleeping with the light on. She said she didn't like when I worked late because she wasn't sure when I would come in. That should have been my warning, but I was tired, and fear has a way of sounding reasonable when you are exhausted. I stayed because I believed loyalty mattered, because I believed showing up would protect me, because I believed being useful was the same as being valued. I was wrong. By the time John fired me in front of everyone, I had already given more than I could afford. I just hadn't realized the bill was coming. The meeting was supposed to be routine. Clients in the room, slides on the screen, coffee cooling on the table. I was halfway through explaining the system, the one I had built, the one they depended on. John interrupted, not gently, not to clarify, but to stop everything. He lowered his voice, but not enough. "You are fired." The words landed in the room, heavy, unavoidable. He said it like it was a correction, like he was fixing a mistake, like I was the mistake. He explained that they had found someone cheaper, that the numbers made more sense this way, that business decisions were not personal. No one moved. The clients stared at the table, at their notes, anywhere but at me. Someone coughed, someone shifted in their chair. John kept talking, explaining timelines, explaining transitions, explaining how quickly things would move without me. He told me to hand over access, to document what I could, to be professional about it. Professional. I stood there for a moment, not shocked, just aware. Aware that he chose this moment. Aware that he wanted witnesses. Aware that this was meant to reduce me. I nodded, because arguing would change nothing, because dignity was the only thing left to control. I walked back to my desk, past people who suddenly found their screens very interesting, past conversations that stopped when I passed. I logged in one last time, not to change anything, not to damage anything, just to look, to see the systems running, the approvals stacked, the processes moving quietly because I was still there. John thought he had removed a person. What he had really done was remove the one thing holding everything together. I packed my bag slowly and left. Not angry, not loud, just very clear. Something had ended in that room, and something else had already started. The first thing I noticed after it happened, after the room cleared, after John walked away, was how quickly people stopped looking at me, not out of cruelty, out of fear. They went back to their screens, their notes, their conversations with clients, as if what had just happened was something contagious. I gathered my things quietly, no rush, no shaking hands, no dramatic exit. My access badge still worked, which told me everything I needed to know. John hadn't planned this properly. He had acted on impulse, on ego, on the belief that authority was enough. I stepped into an empty meeting room and closed the door, not to cry, just to think. That was when the messages started coming in, not from him, from other people. A client asking why their report hadn't synced, a manager asking where the approval workflow lived, someone from finance asking why the forecasting dashboard was frozen. I hadn't frozen anything, not yet, but I realized something then, something John never had. Nothing in that building actually moved without me. The systems ran because I knew how they talked to each other. The approvals flowed because I knew where the breaks were. The reports worked because I had built them to catch problems before anyone noticed. It all looked automatic because I had made it look that way. John thought I was replaceable because he had never understood the difference between a role and a system, between a title and the person holding everything together. I opened my laptop, not to fix anything, just to look. Every process I touched had my fingerprints on it, not visible, not labeled, but present. I could already see where things would stall, where errors would pile up, where delays would multiply. And I understood something that settled in my chest with surprising calm. I didn't need to do anything loud. I didn't need to announce anything. I didn't need to take revenge. All I had to do was stop holding everything together. That was the moment the power shifted. Not when John raised his voice, not when I was fired in front of everyone, but when I realized he had never known what I was actually doing, and the company was about to learn it the hard way. I didn't make the decision right away. I went home first. Bella was on the couch with her knees pulled up, cartoons playing softly. She looked up when I came in earlier than usual. She asked if everything was okay. I said yes, because in that moment, it was. That night, I slept without my phone beside me for the first time in years. No alerts, no emergency messages, no quiet dread waiting for morning. The next day, I woke up clear. Not angry, not scared. Clear. By mid-morning, the calls started. Not from John at first, from people who never needed me before. People who only spoke to me when something was already breaking. Systems weren't syncing. Approvals weren't moving. Clients were waiting. Deadlines were slipping. I listened. I didn't rush. I didn't interrupt. Then John called. His voice was different now, lower, careful. He said there had been a misunderstanding, that firing me in front of clients hadn't been ideal, that emotions had been high. He said they needed me back, just temporarily, just to stabilize things. I let the silence stretch, long enough for him to hear it. I asked one question: had anything changed about how I was treated? He didn't answer directly. He talked about urgency, about pressure, about how the company couldn't afford delays. That told me everything. I said no. Not loudly, not dramatically, just no. I didn't explain. I didn't justify. I didn't threaten. I simply chose not to return to the place that had already shown me exactly what I meant to them. That was the moment it became real. For him. For them. Because I wasn't attacking. I wasn't freezing systems. I wasn't doing anything aggressive. I was just no longer saving them. And without that, everything they thought was solid was already starting to come apart. The collapse did not happen in one dramatic moment. It unfolded quietly, in delays, in missed handoffs, in confusion that no one could trace back to a single mistake. Meetings kept getting rescheduled. Clients started asking the same questions twice. Reports stopped matching what people saw on their screens. John tried to manage it himself. He had always said the systems were simple, that anyone could step in. Now he was the one stepping in. I heard about it from people who still worked there. Not gossip, just facts. They were tired. They were staying late. They were fixing one issue only to create another. Clients noticed. They always do. Not because they understand systems, but because they feel uncertainty. One client asked to pause a contract. Another asked for a full audit. A third stopped responding entirely. John called again, then emailed, then sent messages that sounded less like instructions and more like requests. He asked if I could consult, just for a few weeks, just to help them stabilize. I asked if anything had changed. He said they would talk about it later. That was my answer. The company announced an internal restructuring, new roles, new titles, same problems. People started leaving, quietly, one by one, not because they hated the place, but because they could feel it sinking. I watched from a distance, not with revenge, not with anger, with clarity. This was not revenge, this was consequence. They had removed the person who held the system together, then acted surprised when it stopped holding. I didn't celebrate, I didn't comment, I didn't step in. I just stayed still and let the truth do what it always does when it's finally left alone. The offer came quietly, not through a posting, not through a recruiter. It came from someone who had been watching, a competitor, one of the firms that had sat across the table in joint meetings, the kind of place that noticed patterns instead of titles. They didn't ask why I left. They already knew. News travels fast when systems fail. They asked how I thought, how I built processes, how I handled pressure when things broke. They asked about Bella, not as an afterthought, but as part of the conversation. They offered a role that made sense, clear authority, clear boundaries, support where it mattered. The pay was higher, not just enough to say yes, enough to feel respected. They didn't rush me. They told me to take a weekend, to talk it through with my daughter, to rest. That alone told me everything. When I started, the difference was immediate. People asked before deciding, listened before changing things, documented instead of assuming. When something went wrong, the question wasn't who failed, it was what broke. I stopped working late by default, stopped checking my phone at dinner, stopped apologizing for having a life. Bella noticed before I said anything. She asked why I smiled more, why I came home on time, why weekends felt quieter. I told her I worked somewhere that cared. She nodded, like that made perfect sense. I built new systems, not out of fear, but out of intention. And this time, they weren't fragile, because they weren't built on one person carrying everything. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was simply present, and that made all the difference. The old company didn't collapse all at once. It thinned. Meetings got quieter, decisions took longer, people stopped trusting timelines. I watched from a distance, not with satisfaction, just with clarity. They reached out, eventually, not with apologies, with urgency. They said things had stalled, that systems weren't syncing, that clients were asking questions. They asked if I could come back, just to help, just to stabilize things. I said no. Not because I was angry, but because I understood something now. What I gave them wasn't technical, it wasn't data, it wasn't even experience, it was attention, consistency, care. You can't remove that from someone, then ask for it back when things break. Life settled. Work stayed where it belonged. Bella stopped waiting up with the light on. One evening she told me, "You don't look tired anymore." That was the real outcome. If you've ever given more than you were paid for, if you've ever stayed because you thought loyalty would protect you, if you've ever been reduced to a line item after building something that worked, this story is for you. You don't need revenge. You don't need to freeze anything. Sometimes the strongest response is simply stepping away and letting the truth reveal itself. If stories like this resonate with you, stories about quiet strength, about dignity, about choosing yourself without noise, subscribe to this channel. These are the stories we tell here, and you're not alone in them.